So I finished my triple threat experiment, as I called it, which involved the three threat of addictions of beer and coffee and nicotine. So that was about a month ago. Once I started, once I once I finished the three drugs, and then went for 3 weeks with none of them. So to start, I increased the amount I drank coffee, the amount I drank alcohol, and the amount I vaped, and a few cigarettes for about 2 weeks. And then the plan was to go after that 3 weeks with none of those three things to see how addicted I was to all three and see how it would affect me, which was the most addictive. So it was an interesting experiment to see what affects me the most and what was the most addictive, and to really understand some more effects of addiction. It's been so after I went 3 weeks with none of them. Now it's been a week since I've been having all three again. So it was the most difficult addiction experiment I've done so far. Before this, I'd only tested cigarettes and vaping. And this time, the most difficult part was not nicotine. It was not vaping and or cigarettes. I was a little surprised that the most difficult addiction for me was coffee right here. I think that's because I enjoy it so much as a useful tool, sort of, because it enhances mental ability, really, I find, and it makes certain things more enjoyable. I like being able to think a lot and think fast, and I'm a little bit of a thrill seeker, so that's probably another relatable effect. The second most addictive, I think, was alcohol. The most difficult to stop. Sorry, that got cut off there. But alcohol was the second most difficult. Probably because could be because I've had it for a longer time than cigarettes. Having long-term sort of addiction, if you call it an addiction. I've just been drinking it for a long time. It's like one glass of wine or one beer per day. Since it's long term, it may be more addictive to me. And nicotine, actually, the vaping did not seem that addictive. Is the least addictive out of the cigarettes or nicotine, cigarettes or vaping experiments I've done so far. It was the least addictive. Okay, not true. Not compared to 3-nic vaping. That was actually basically nothing. I didn't notice anything at all from what I remember from the 3-nic vaping experiment. But compared to cigarettes, yeah, this was less addictive. I was vaping 8-nic, which I think I preferred over cigarettes, but it was still less addictive than cigarettes. Perhaps because subconsciously, less nicotine, so less dopamine. So, um, so the amount of nicotine probably made a fair difference, but also I think could have been partially because I wasn't drinking alcohol, and often I get more cravings for nicotine when I'm drinking alcohol. So overall, with the three addictions, it seemed that circumstances was a huge influence on what I was craving. Caffeine, I would crave the most. Um, in any of the circumstances where I would normally have coffee, regularly before this whole experiment, I would have on average one coffee every other day, maybe. But I would use it at certain times for writing. I would write philosophy sort of posts sometimes and go to philosophy discussions. So for those, I would always have coffee, or sometimes just hanging out with friends and playing video games or playing board games. I would always want a coffee for that. So any of those circumstances would really trigger the temptation for coffee. And same with alcohol. So, with alcohol, the biggest temptations were weekends. Mostly weekends with hang out with friends when normally I would have some alcohol just to relax and enjoy the time more. That was the biggest temptation for alcohol. Almost the biggest. The other, probably overall biggest, was a couple circumstances where I felt pretty depressed, and that, of course, triggers a real temptation for alcohol, as well as nicotine, but not as much as alcohol, I found. So that was the most difficult during the 3 weeks. Because of circumstances, basically I've had ongoing circumstances where I become depressed and then become really hopeful because of a girl, really. But the point is, when I become really depressed, that makes a huge craving for alcohol. And it was really difficult to go those 3 weeks. During those couple times of depression. And another thing, I had some sort of, call it, no, not coping mechanism, but substitutes. I felt like I had some substitutes for no longer having any of these three drugs, which they really are: alcohol, nicotine, caffeine. During the 3 weeks, I had none of those, so I found some substitutes. I started eating a lot of junk food. I was doing that, I think subconsciously as well as consciously, knowing I was eating that or using something else to substitute for the drugs that I would normally have. Normally I don't eat much junk food. I normally eat healthy. So during those 3 weeks, pretty consistently I had a lot more junk food. And I also noticed from that feeling more sick and less energy, as junk food normally does. So since I finished the 3 week period, I've stopped eating junk food mostly, which feels a lot better. But that's almost another topic. Maybe I should do maybe we should do a junk food addiction. I don't know. Experiment test. Another substitute I tried to use was weed. I tried that a little bit. I've had it before. Um, it's legal here in Canada now, so that was a little more convenient. I just ordered it from the government, and it shipped to my house. I tried that a couple times, but don't really enjoy it. It makes me too paranoid. So that was kind of different. And another substitute was once I had Mountain Dew, which has caffeine in it. So maybe that was a little partial cheating on the caffeine, the coffee withdrawal or coffee abstinence. What you call it? So, other than that, I didn't really have anything else to substitute for not having the 3 drugs for the 3 weeks. That's basically it. I feel like it was a good test of willpower, which I've found for all these experiments, these addiction experiments. I feel like it's helpful. It helps you be aware of the effects of potential addiction, aware of what cravings you get, and once you're aware of the causes of cravings and circumstances which cause cravings, you can be more aware of how to control it and be aware of the effects of not having those substances. So overall, I think it's a good sort of test of willpower. If anyone's trying to quit anything, I'd suggest trying something similar, just trying to quit for a certain time period to test your willpower. Try a week or 2 with nothing, rather than, if you have trouble like quitting permanently, you tell yourself you're going to quit permanently, but then start doing it more. If you tell yourself it's like 2 weeks, and you know, 2 or 3 weeks or a month, and you know you're going to continue after that, it'll make it more realistic. If you do that a few times, I feel like it tests willpower and builds up strength. So now, I've started my next addiction experiment with vaping, but I'll do another video on that. With coffee and alcohol, I think I will go back to managing it as I did before, managing coffee to the circumstances where it's practical, and alcohol back to basically once a day, because I heard that it's healthy, whether that's true or not, to have like 1 glass of wine per day, and it's enjoyable to have once per day. And then maybe more on weekends, of course, sometimes. But I think that's pretty much it for the triple threat. It was a tough one, and probably the toughest I will do, I'm guessing. But we'll see with this next vaping experiment.